Treasure Island, Chapter 2. Black Dog Appears and Disappears. It was not very long after this that there occurred the first of the mysterious events that rid us at last of the captain, though not, as you will see, of his affairs. It was a bitter and cold winter with long, hard frosts and heavy gales, and it was plain from the first that my poor father was little likely to see the spring. He sank daily, and my mother and I had all the inn upon our hands, and were kept busy enough without paying much regard to our unpleasant guest. It was one January morning, very early, a pinching, frosty morning, the cove all grey with hoar-frost, the ripple lapping softly at the stones, the sun still low and only touching the hilltops, and shining far to the seaward. The captain had risen earlier than usual and set out down the beach, his cutlass swinging under the broad skirts of the old blue coat, his brass telescope under his arm, his hat tilted back upon his head. I remember his breath hanging like smoke in the wake as he strode off, and the last sound I heard of him as he turned the big rock was a loud snort of indignation, as though his mind was still running upon Dr. Levese. Well, mother was upstairs with father, and I was laying the breakfast table against the captain's return, when the parlor door opened and a man stepped in on whom I had never set eyes before. He was a pale, tallowy creature, wanting 2 fingers on his left hand, and though he wore a cutlass, he did not look much like a fighter. I had always had my eye open for seafaring men, with 1 leg or 2, and I remember this one puzzled me. He was not sailory, yet he had a smack of the sea about him too. I asked him what for his service, and he said he would take rum. But as I was going out of the room to fetch it, he sat down upon a table and motioned me to draw near. I paused where I was with my napkin in my hand. "Come here, sonny," says he. "Come nearer here." I took a step nearer. "Is this your table for my mate Bill?" he asked with a kind of a leer. I told him I did not know his mate Bill, and this was for a person who stayed in our house, whom we called the captain. "Well," said he, "my mate Bill would be called captain as like as not. He has a cut on 1 cheek, and a mighty pleasant way with him, particularly in drink, has my mate Bill. We'll put it, for argument like, that your captain has a cut on 1 cheek, and we'll put it, if you like, that that cheek's the right one. Ah, well, I told you. Now, is my mate Bill in this here house?" I told him he was out walking. "Which way, sonny? Which way is he gone?" And when I had pointed out the rock and told him how the captain was likely to return, and how soon, and answered a few other questions, "Ah," says he, "this'll be as good as drink to my mate Bill." The expression of his face as he said these words was not at all pleasant, and I had my own reasons for thinking that the stranger was mistaken, even supposing he meant what he said. But it was no affair of mine, I thought, and besides, it was difficult to know what to do. The stranger kept hanging about inside the inn door, peering round the corner like a cat waiting for a mouse. Once I stepped out myself into the road, but he immediately called me back, and as I did not obey quick enough for his fancy, a most horrible change came over his tallowy face, and he ordered me with an oath that made me jump. As soon as I was back again, he returned to his former manner, half fawning, half sneering, patting me on the shoulder, told me I was a good boy and he had taken quite a fancy to me. "I have a son of my own," said he, "as like you as 2 blocks, and he's the pride of my art. But the great thing for boys is discipline, sonny, discipline. Now if you'd sailed along of Bill, you wouldn't have stood there to be spoke to twice, not you. That was never Bill's way, nor the way of such as sailed with him. And here, sure enough, is my mate Bill with a spyglass under his arm. Bless his old art, to be sure. You and me'll just go back into the parlor, sonny, and get behind the door, and we'll give Bill a little surprise. Bless his heart, I say again." So saying, the stranger backed along with me into the parlor and put me behind him into the corner, so that we were both hidden by the open door. I was very uneasy and alarmed, as you may fancy, but it was rather added to my fears to observe that the stranger was certainly frightened himself. He cleared the hilt of his cutlass and loosened the blade in its sheath, and all the time we were waiting there he kept swallowing as if he had felt what we used to call a lump in the throat. At last in strode the captain, slammed the door behind him without looking to the right or the left, and marched straight across the room to where his breakfast awaited him. "Bill," said the stranger in a voice that I thought he tried to make big and bold. The captain spun around on his heel and fronted us. All the brown had gone out of his face, and even his nose was blue. He had the look of a man who had seized a ghost, or the evil one, or something worse, if anything can be. And upon my word, I felt sorry to see him all in a moment turn so old and sick. "Come, Bill, you know me. You know an old shipmate, Bill, surely," said the stranger. The captain made a sort of gasp. "Black Dog," said he. "And who else?" returned the other, getting more at his ease. "Black Dog as ever was, come for to see his old shipmate Billy at the Admiral Benbow Inn. Ah, Bill, Bill, we've seen a sight of times, us two, since I lost them 2 talons," he said, holding up his mutilated hand. "Now look here," said the captain, "you've run me down. Here I am. Well, then, speak up. What is it?" "That's you, Bill," returned the dog. "You're in the right of it, Billy. I'll have a glass of rum from this dear child here, as I've took to such a liking to, and we'll sit down, if you please, and talk square like old shipmates." When I returned with the rum, they were already seated on either side of the captain's breakfast table. Black Dog next to the door, and sitting sideways so as to have one eye on his old shipmate, and one, as I thought, on his retreat. Now he bade me go and leave the door wide open. "None of your keyholes for me, sonny," he said, and I left them together and retired into the bar. For a long time, though, I certainly did my best to listen. I could hear nothing but low gattling. But at last the voices began to grow higher, and I could pick up a word or two, mostly oaths, from the captain. "No, no, 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 and an end of it," he cried at once. And again, "If it comes to swinging, swing all, I say." Then, all of a sudden, there was a tremendous explosion of oaths and other noises. The chair and table went over in a lump, a clash of steel followed, and then a cry of pain, and the next instant I saw Black Dog in full flight, and the captain hotly pursuing, both with drawn cutlasses, and the former streaming blood from his left shoulder. Just at the door, the captain aimed at the fugitive one last tremendous cut, which certainly would have split him to the chin had it not been intercepted by our big signboard of Admiral Benbow. You may see the notch on the lower side of the frame to this day. That blow was the last of the battle. Once out upon the road, Black Dog, in spite of his wound, showed a pair of clean heels and disappeared over the edge of the hill in half a minute. The captain, for his part, stood staring at the signboard like a bewildered man. Then he passed his hands over his eyes several times and at last turned back into the house. "Jim," says he, "rum." And as he spoke he reeled a little and caught himself with one hand against the wall. "Are you hurt?" cried I. "Rum," he repeated. "I must get away from here. Rum, rum." I ran to fetch it, but I was quite unsteadied by all that had fallen out, and I broke one glass and fouled the tap while I was still getting in my own way. I heard a loud fall in the parlor, and, running in, beheld the captain lying full length upon the floor. At the same instant my mother, alarmed by the cries and fighting, came running downstairs to help me. Between us we raised his head. He was breathing very loud and hard, but his eyes were closed and his face a horrible color. "Dearie me, dearie me," cried my mother, "what a disgrace upon the house, and your poor father sick." In the meantime we had no idea what to do to help the captain, nor any other thought but that he had got his death hurt in the scuffle with the stranger. I got the rum, to be sure, and tried to put it down his throat, but his teeth were tightly shut and his jaws as strong as iron. It was a happy relief for us when the door opened and Dr. Levese came in on his visit to my father. "Oh, doctor," we cried, "what shall we do? Where is he wounded?" "Wounded? A fiddlestick's end," said the doctor. "No more wounded than you or I. The man has had a stroke, as I warned him. Now, Mrs. Hawkins, just as you run upstairs to your husband and tell him, if possible, nothing about it. For my part, I must do my best to save this fellow's trebly worthless life. Jim, you get me a basin." When I got back with the basin, the doctor had already ripped up the captain's sleeves and exposed his great sinewy arm. It was tattooed in several places. "Here's luck. A fair wind. Billy Bones, his fancy, were neatly and clearly executed on his forearm. And up near the shoulder there was a sketch of a gallows and a man hanging from it, done, as I thought, with great spirit. Prophetic, said the doctor, touching the picture with his finger. And now, Mr. Billy Bones, if that be your name, we'll have a look at the color of your blood, he said. Jim, are you afraid of blood? No, sir, said I. Well then, said he, you hold the basin. And with that he took his lancet and opened up a vein. A great deal of blood was taken before the captain opened his eyes and looked mistily about him. First he recognized the doctor with an unmistakable frown. Then his glance fell upon me, and he looked relieved. But suddenly his color changed, and he tried to raise himself, crying, Where's Black Dog? There's no Black Dog here, said the doctor, except what you have on your own back. You've been drinking rum. You've had a stroke, precisely as I told you. And I have just, very much against my own will, dragged you head foremost out of the grave. Now, Mr. Bones. That's not my name, he interrupted. Much I care, returned the doctor. It's the name of a buccaneer of my acquaintance, and I call you by it for the sake of shortness. And what I have to say to you is this. One glass of rum won't kill you, but if you take one, you'll take another and another, and I'll stake my wig if you don't break off short, you'll die. Do you understand that? Die. And go to your own place like the man in the Bible. Come now, make an effort. I'll help you to your bed for once. Between us, with much trouble, we managed to hoist him upstairs and laid him out on his bed, where his head fell back on the pillow as if he were almost fainting. Now, mind you, said the doctor, I clear my conscience. The name of rum for you is death. And with that he went off to see my father, taking me with him by the arm. This is nothing, he said as soon as he had closed the door. I've drawn blood enough to keep him quiet a while. He should lie for a week where he is. That is the best thing for him and you, but another stroke would settle him. This is the end of chapter 2. Now, there's a word that was used in here, tallowy. And because it ends in a Y, that means it's probably an adjective. So you take words and you put a Y at the end, and that makes it into an adjective. So speedy is having speed, or tallowy is like tallow, or anything can be used. I mean, lively. So my last name, Lively, which means with life. It can also, actually it ends in ly, so it also can be an adverb. But adverbs modify verbs, adjectives modify nouns. So my last name is Lively, ends in a Y. Lively with life. So he's a lively fellow, which means he's energetic and hearty and moves around a lot. Not necessarily descriptive of your pop. Anyway, the word tallowy was used to describe Black Dog, the stranger who came in. Now, tallowy means like tallow, and tallow is beef fat. Specifically, it's like the belly fat of the beef. It's found interstitial between layers of tougher material. So tallow was something that they were very familiar with back then. It was used often to make candles. It was also used in food. Up until about 20 or 30 years ago, McDonald's used to fry their fries in tallow, which is beef fat. And frying foods in different fats gives them different flavors. And the beef fat had this wonderful effect on the fries that made them really crispy and just kind of soaked in a little bit. And that just has to do with the shape of the fat molecules. But anyway, tallow was something that they were very familiar with. They used it in food. They used it to fry things. They used it in candles. And it's this sort of whitish yellow waxy substance. It's not quite as hard as wax, but it's harder than most of the fat that you normally just find, like, on the side of a steak or bacon. It's like harder than that fat, but not like hard as wax. Anyway, so they described the guy as tallowy. So that means he probably had this kind of greasy appearance about him. That he was very pale. Now, they described the captain, or Billy Bones, who perhaps he's Billy Bones, perhaps he's not. Black Dog certainly called him Billy. Dr. Levesi seems to think that he's Billy Bones. Anyway, they describe the captain as being brown. Now, that could be something from being outside a lot, because back then, if you were outside a lot, you got really tanned. Your father tans incredibly well. Anyway, so it could be dark-skinned from being out in the sun, as opposed to Black Dog, who would be more of an inside person. So maybe Black Dog worked on inside of the ship's cabin. Maybe he was working at... Maybe he wasn't like an actual sailor. Maybe he was like inside, or as opposed to Billy Bones, the captain, who was this dark, weathered look. Or perhaps the captain was African or of African descent or something like that, because pirates came in all colors. There were all sorts of pirates. So we don't really know why one was darker and the other was lighter. But it's, also the captain was described as having sinewy arms. Now, sinew is the tendons. So that's another part of an animal or part of people, because, people are animals. And anyway, so it's this really hard, tough material. Very strong, very stretchy. So his arms were described as sinewy. So he was probably one of those people with the ripped muscles, and they just go like this, and the veins pop out, and it's just like cut. So that's the captain. That's Black Dog. And they fought, and the captain won. Considering that, Black Dog was introduced as not looking like much of a fighter. And, he lost. He got his shoulder cut. Now, did he survive? We don't know. He ran off. And, a shoulder cut might be bad, might be superficial. No way to know. But the thing is that back then, even superficial cuts could kill you. I mean, if you get a small cut on your arm, something that, you wash off with soap and water and don't worry about, that could kill people back then, because they didn't know about hygiene. They didn't know about germs. They didn't know that you wash things out with soap and water and you keep them clean. So, if you get a cut on your arm and then you're gutting a fish or something like that, all of the gunk from the fish gets on the cut in the arm. Or if you're doing whatever and, these little things can get infected. And once you get infected, you can get dead. But now we have modern medicine, and we know, you don't let the wounds get dirty. And if you let the wounds get dirty, then we have all sorts of drugs to treat the infections that you get. So we know a little bit more about the captain now. He's down with a stroke. We'll see what happens. This is getting exciting.